Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoyed this story. Tonight, let yourself drift into a tale both calming and mysterious, a journey into the heart of great smiles, where ancient secrets lie waiting to be uncovered. Beneath the soft glow of candlelight, within earthen walls that have stood for centuries, an unwitting adventurer stirs something long forgotten. Listen closely, and let the voice of this story guide you through dim corridors, into the depths of silence where the wind murmurs and the past has not yet faded away. Take a slow breath. Close your eyes if you wish. The story begins now. The night was calm over the rolling green hills of the Shire, a silver mist clinging lazily to the grass as the stars twinkled above like scattered gems. Inside the Great Smiles, the grandest and oldest hobbit hole in Tuckborough, Peregrine Took, better known as Pippin, walked alone through the dimly lit corridors, his footsteps muffled by the thick rugs lining the floor. The Great Smiles had been the seat of the Took family for generations, home to the Thanes of the Shire. Pippin, now Thane himself, had spent most of his childhood here, playing in its many tunnels, hiding in its countless nooks and crannies. But there were places even he had never explored, doors that have remained closed for decades, rooms that had long since been forgotten. Tonight, something had drawn him deeper into the halls, past the well-lit and bustling living quarters, beyond the warmth of hearths where younger Tooks still gathered with song and laughter. A strange feeling had settled over him, an urge to walk where his feet had never wandered before. The air grew cooler as he descended a narrow hallway lined with old portraits, their faces dimly illuminated by flickering candlelight. The eyes of his ancestors seemed to follow him, their expressions unreadable, some solemn, some proud, others mischievous, as if they knew a secret he had yet to uncover. Then he saw it. At the end of the hallway stood a door he had never noticed before. Unlike the others, it was heavier, older, its wood dark with age. A layer of dust coated its handle, and the hinges were lined with rust. No one had entered for a very long time. Pippin hesitated, feeling a slight unease settle in his chest. He had no reason to enter, no pressing need to disturb whatever lay beyond. Yet something compelled him forward. With a deep breath, he reached out and turned the handle. It creaked loudly in protest, but the door swung open. The room was small, its walls lined with wooden shelves, their surfaces cluttered with dust-covered trinkets, old maps, and books with crumbling pages. A large desk stood in the center, its surface almost entirely buried beneath stacks of parchment. In the dim candlelight, Pippin could see the edges of a tapestry hanging on the far wall, its fabric moth-eaten and faded with age. He stepped inside, trailing his fingers over the objects, wondering who had last stood in this room, what memories had been left behind. And then his eyes caught something odd. One of the bookshelves, unlike the others, seemed slightly out of place. The wood looked smoother, the dust less settled. As he reached out to touch it, his fingers brushed against a small notch on the side, almost as if it were a handle. Without thinking, he gave it a light push. A faint click echoed through the room. The bookshelf shifted. A hidden door. His breath caught as he stepped back, watching in awe as the shelf slid open, revealing a dark passageway leading further into the depths of the Smiles. The air that seeped from within was stale, heavy with the scent of forgotten things. Pippin's heart pounded, but but excitement overpowered his hesitation. He had been a soldier, a knight of Gondor. He had faced trolls and fought in great battles. A secret tunnel beneath his own home should be nothing compared to those things. With a grin, he grabbed a nearby candle and stepped inside. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for a hobbit to walk through comfortably. The walls were made of ancient stone rather than the well-carved wood of the Smiles, and the ceiling was lower than usual, forcing Pippin to stoop slightly as he moved forward. The air was thick with dust, and cobwebs brushed against his face, but he pressed on, curiosity driving him deeper. He wondered how long this tunnel had been here, who had built it, and why it had been hidden away. Was it meant to be an escape route? Or had it been used to conceal something long ago? After what felt like minutes of careful steps, he reached a small chamber at the end of the tunnel. It was unlike any room he had ever seen in the Smiles. The walls were lined with old, cracked wooden panels, and a large stone table stood at the center, covered in an assortment of objects: quills, ink bottles, half-written scrolls. An unlit lantern rested beside them, its glass fogged with time. But what truly caught Pippin's attention was the single chair at the head of the table. It was grander than any other in the room, carved from dark wood with intricate patterns twisting along its arms and legs. Despite the dust and age, it still looked imposing, as if whoever had once sat there had been of great importance. Pippin stepped forward, running his fingers over the surface of the table. His touch disturbed the dust, revealing an old symbol carved into the wood. A family crest, a tree entwined with a curling script and an ancient tongue. He frowned, tracing the design. It looked familiar. He had seen it before, though he couldn't remember where. As he pondered, his fingers brushed against a candle that had long since gone out, its wax hardened with time. Almost instinctively, he reached for his own candle and touched the flame to the wick. The moment the fire caught, the room shuddered. A chill swept through the air, snuffing out Pippin's candle in an instant. The darkness thickened, the air growing impossibly cold. The small flicker of the newly lit candle remained, casting long, twisting shadows along the walls. And then, a voice. Soft at first, like the whisper of wind through trees. Then stronger. Peregrine Took. Pippin's breath hitched. The voice was deep, old, and oddly familiar. It carried an air of authority, yet there was something else beneath it, something weary, something longing. From the shadows, a figure began to form. At first, it was nothing more than a shimmer, like moonlight on water. Then it took shape, vague and translucent, yet unmistakably hobbit-like. Clad in an old-fashioned coat, with sharp eyes that gleamed even through the haze, the figure floated just above the floor, its presence filling the room with an eerie stillness. Pippin stumbled back, his heart hammering. He knew this face. He had seen it in portraits, had heard tales whispered by older relatives. Gerontius Took. The old Took. The greatest thing the Shire had ever known. And he was looking straight at Pippin. The ghost's lips parted, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of years long past. You should not have come here. Pippin swallowed hard. The air around him felt heavier, pressing against his skin like an unseen force. But fear was quickly drowned out by something else, curiosity, the same insatiable drive that had led him down this path. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. I didn't mean to disturb you, he said, his voice only slightly unsteady. But Why are you here?" The ghost did not answer immediately. Instead, his gaze drifted over the room as if lost in memories only he could see. Then, finally, he turned back to Pippin. "I have been waiting," he said, "for someone to listen." The candle flickered again, casting their shadows against the stone. And with that, the night and the great smiles grew darker still. For a long moment, Pippin simply stood there, staring at the spectral figure before him. The glow surrounding Gerontius Took was faint, like the last remnants of twilight clinging to the horizon before vanishing into the night. His features were worn yet noble, a face Pippin had only seen in faded portraits hanging in the halls of Great Smiles. But those paintings had not captured the weight of years in his gaze, the wisdom and sorrow lingering in his ghostly eyes. Pippin's hands were clammy, his heart drumming in his chest, but he forced himself to stand his ground. He had faced far worse than this: ring wraiths, trolls, even a maddened Denethor in the flames of his own despair. A ghost should not shake him. And yet, there was something profoundly unsettling about standing in the presence of one's long-dead ancestor, especially when said ancestor looked as though he had something urgent, perhaps even terrible, to say. The flickering candlelight wavered, casting long, restless shadows on the walls. The cold in the chamber deepened, seeping into Pippin's bones. He swallowed, forcing himself to speak. Waiting for someone to listen? His voice came out steadier than he felt. "What do you mean?" Gerontius, Old Took, as he had always been called in stories, tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "The living so rarely stop to listen to the dead," he murmured. His voice carried the weight of years, but it was as soft as the rustling of autumn leaves. "And yet, here you are." Pippin tried to summon a sense of levity, his old Tookish mischief rising to the surface despite the chill in the air. "Well, in my defense, I wasn't expecting to find a secret passage in my own home. Let alone you, lurking about." The ghost's expression did not change. "This is not my home," he said. "Not anymore." His eyes drifted toward the stone table, the old scrolls and forgotten relics scattered across its surface. "It has been so long. And yet, some things remain." Pippin followed his gaze, taking a hesitant step forward. "What is this place?" he asked. "I thought I knew every room in Great Smiles, but I've never seen anything like this before." Old Took exhaled, though there was no breath to be seen. "A chamber of secrets, of old truths buried beneath the weight of time. It was once a place of great importance, though it seems the years have done their best to erase it." His gaze sharpened, fixing on Pippin once more. "Until now." Pippin shivered, though not entirely from the cold. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "You said you've been waiting to tell someone something," he pressed. "What is it?" For the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossed Old Took's face, as though he were considering his words carefully. Then, with slow, deliberate movement, he raised a translucent hand and pointed toward the far end of the chamber. "There," he said. Pippin turned, squinting into the gloom. At first, he saw nothing but the darkened edges of the room where the candlelight barely reached. But as his eyes adjusted, he noticed something: an old wooden chest, its surface worn with age. The lid was closed, the metal hinges rusted. He hesitated. "What's in it?" Old Took's gaze was heavy. A truth that was meant to be forgotten. That was not an answer that inspired much confidence. Pippin frowned, glancing between the ghost and the chest. If it was meant to be forgotten, why tell me? The ghost's expression did not waver. Because it was never meant to be lost. Pippin exhaled sharply through his nose. That's a rather roundabout way of saying open the chest, you know. But even as he said it, a part of him knew he would do exactly that. There was something about this place, about this moment, that felt like it had been waiting for him, like a puzzle long buried, finally being unearthed. He approached the chest cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. Dust lay thick on its surface, undisturbed for decades, maybe centuries. He brushed a hand over it, wiping away some of the grime. The wood was solid, though rough beneath his fingertips. Bracing himself, he gripped the edges of the lid and lifted. The hinges groaned in protest, rust flaking away as the lid creaked open. Inside, resting atop layers of faded cloth, was a bundle wrapped in dark velvet. Carefully, Pippin reached in and lifted it free, his fingers tingling with a strange sensation, as though the very air around it pulsed with something unseen. He unwrapped it slowly. Beneath the fabric lay a small wooden box, ornately carved with the same crest he had seen on the table, a tree entwined with curling script. The wood was dark, polished despite its age. It felt heavier than it should, as if it carried more than just its physical weight. Pippin glanced back at Old Took. What is this? For the first time, the ghost's expression softened. There was something almost wistful in his eyes. The last piece of a forgotten legacy, he murmured. A burden carried by our line, lost to time but never truly gone. Pippin's fingers hesitated over the latch. His heart pounded in his chest, a strange mixture of anticipation and apprehension filling his veins. He could feel it now. Whatever was inside this box was important. It mattered. And yet, some deep, instinctive part of him wondered if there were things best left undisturbed. Slowly, he flicked open the latch. A sharp gust of air, colder than before, rushed through the chamber. The candle flickered violently, nearly going out. Pippin flinched, his breath catching in his throat. Inside the box lay a single object. A ring. But not like the One Ring, not like the golden band that had once haunted his nightmares. This ring was different, silver, marked with delicate engravings that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Its design was intricate, the patterns curling like vines around its band. Something about it felt ancient, important. He reached out, hesitating only briefly before picking it up. The moment his fingers touched the metal, a strange sensation rushed through him, like the distant echo of a voice, a whisper just beyond hearing. He sucked in a sharp breath, jerking his hand back. The ring remained cold in his palm. Pippin turned to Old Took, his throat dry. What is this? The ghost's gaze darkened. A promise, he said. One that was never fulfilled. Pippin's grip tightened around the ring. He could feel it now, the weight of something long buried, something left undone. And suddenly, he knew. This was only the beginning. The candlelight trembled, the shadows deepening against the walls. The chill in the room grew stronger, the silence stretching between them. And then, softly, Old Took spoke again. Peregrine, he murmured. You have woken more than just a ghost. The darkness in the chamber seemed to shift, as though something unseen stirred in the corners of the room. And Pippin realized, with a slow, dawning certainty, that whatever had been forgotten in the depths of great smiles, it was no longer content to stay that way. A long silence stretched between Pippin and the ghost of Old Took. The chill in the chamber deepened, wrapping around Pippin like unseen tendrils of mist. He stared down at the silver ring in his palm, the faint engravings catching the flickering candlelight. The weight of it, small as it was, felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. He swallowed hard, glancing up at his ancestor. "What do you mean? I've woken more than just a ghost." Old Took's spectral form flickered, as if the very air around him was uncertain whether to hold him in place. His gaze, sharp and piercing, settled on the ring in Pippin's palm. "There are things buried beneath the weight of years, Peregrine," he said softly. "Secrets, oaths, promises left unfulfilled. Some of them are content to remain forgotten." Pippin clenched his fingers around the ring, feeling the cool metal press into his palm. "And this one wasn't?" The ghost's expression did not change. "No," he said simply. A faint shiver ran down Pippin's spine. He wasn't entirely sure he liked where this was going. The shadows in the chamber seemed to stretch and shift, as if something unseen was listening, waiting. Pippin's grip tightened around the ring, his pulse thrumming in his ears. "What was this promise?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. Old Took hesitated. Just for a moment. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and pointed toward the far wall. Pippin turned, following the gesture. The wall, at first glance, seemed unremarkable, just old stone and wooden paneling, worn smooth with time. But as he stepped closer, something caught his eye. A mark. Faint, nearly imperceptible beneath the layers of dust. A tree entwined with curling script. The same crest he had seen on the box. Pippin's breath caught. He reached out, brushing his fingers over the design. The stone was cold, unnaturally so. And then, a whisper. Soft, distant, like a voice carried on the wind. It was not in the common tongue, nor in Elvish, nor any language Pippin had ever heard before. And yet, something deep within him recognized it. Not in meaning, but in feeling. A longing. A sorrow. He jerked his hand back, heart pounding. What was that? Old Took's gaze darkened. A memory, he murmured. An echo of something long past. Pippin swallowed, his throat dry. And it's tied to this ring, isn't it? The ghost nodded. Yes. Pippin looked down at the silver band in his palm. It no longer felt cold, it felt alive, as though it pulsed faintly beneath his touch. The engravings, delicate as vines, seemed almost to shift in the candlelight, though he knew that was impossible. A deep breath steadied him, though it did little to quiet the questions racing through his mind. If this was a promise, he said carefully, then who made it? And to whom? Old Took was silent for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he turned his gaze to the shadows lingering in the far corners of the chamber. Pippin followed his eyes and felt his stomach tighten. Something was there. Not quite visible, not quite formed. A presence. A shape just beyond the edge of his sight, like a figure hidden within the mist. A second ghost. Pippin took an instinctive step back, his breath catching. The air around him grew heavier, colder. The candle in his hand wavered violently, its flame shrinking as though struggling against an unseen force. Old Took did not move, nor did he speak. And then, the whisper came again. This time, it was clearer. No longer a mere echo, but a voice. Soft, lingering, and filled with something that sent a chill down Pippin's spine. You found it. The shape in the shadows shifted, stepping forward. Pippin held his breath as the form became clearer, the mist curling away to reveal the faint outline of a hobbit, not as sharply defined as Old Took, but present nonetheless. A woman, her features blurred with age and time, but her eyes bright and knowing. She gazed at Pippin, her expression unreadable. Pippin swallowed hard. Who are you? The ghostly woman tilted her head, as though considering the question. Her form flickered, the candlelight struggling to hold her in focus. Then, at last, she spoke. A daughter of the Tooks. Her voice was soft, but there was something unshakable in it, something ancient and steadfast. Pippin glanced at Old Took, but his ancestor said nothing. His expression was unreadable, his gaze fixed on the ghostly woman with something akin to recognition. Pippin turned back to her. You were part of this promise, he guessed. The ghost's expression did not change. I was. Pippin exhaled slowly. And what was it? The ghost's gaze drifted to the ring in his hand. A bond, she murmured. Forged long ago. Between our blood and something beyond it. A cold dread curled in Pippin's chest. Something beyond it, he repeated carefully. The shadows in the chamber deepened, as though the very walls were listening. The ghost of the Took woman lifted her hand, pointing toward the ring. You must take it back, she said. Pippin frowned. Back where? Her expression darkened. To where it was meant to rest. The whispering in the chamber grew louder, not words but the distant murmuring of something old, something stirring. Pippin shivered. He glanced back at Old Took, who was watching him with quiet intensity. You always did have a knack for finding trouble, Peregrine, Old Took murmured. Pippin let out a breathless laugh, though there was little humor in it. I'd argue trouble finds me. Old Took's ghostly lips quirked slightly, but his expression quickly turned serious once more. She speaks the truth, he said. This ring, it does not belong here. It was meant to be returned long ago. Pippin studied the silver band in his palm, the weight of it pressing against his skin. He could feel it now, something beneath the metal, something waiting. A choice. A burden. He exhaled sharply. And if I don't return it? The Took woman's gaze darkened. Then the past will not rest. The whispering around them grew louder, the unseen presence pressing against the edges of the chamber. The candlelight trembled. The air felt thick with something unspoken. Pippin closed his fingers around the ring. He could feel its weight, not just the metal, but the history woven into it. A thread that stretched beyond him, beyond his ancestors. A forgotten story, waiting to be finished. He took a deep breath. Well then, he said, straightening his shoulders. I suppose I'd best see where this story leads. The ghostly woman watched him for a moment longer, then slowly, she nodded. And as she did, the chamber seemed to exhale, a shift in the air, a whisper of something old stirring once more. the shadows in the room grew still. And Pippin knew, without a doubt, this was only the beginning. Pippin stood in the heart of the hidden chamber, the silver ring resting cold and heavy in his palm. The whispering voices had faded, and the air, though still thick with the remnants of something unseen, had settled into a tense stillness. He glanced at the two ghosts, Old Took, watching him with quiet expectation, and the ghostly Took woman, her gaze fixed on the ring with something close to sorrow. His breath came slow and measured. He had no idea what he had stumbled into, but he could feel, deep in his bones, that it was far older than himself, older even than great smiles. He turned the ring over between his fingers, studying the delicate engravings curling around its band like vines. If this was supposed to be returned, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, then why wasn't it? Old Took exhaled, a strange thing for a ghost to do. Because some things are easier forgotten than faced, he murmured. Even by those who swore otherwise. Pippin's brow furrowed. He didn't like the sound of that. You mean someone chose not to return it? The ghostly woman closed her eyes briefly. Yes. Pippin's grip tightened around the ring. He didn't know who had made the decision, or why, but he had a feeling it had not been made lightly. He exhaled sharply. All right then, he said, trying to steady himself. Where was it supposed to go? The ghostly woman lifted her gaze, staring past him toward the far wall where the old crest was carved into the stone. To the Barrow Downs. Pippin froze. A cold sensation trickled down his spine. He had only been to the Barrow Downs once, and the memory was not a pleasant one. Even now, years later, he could recall the icy touch of the whites, the suffocating darkness of their tombs, the way their voices had slithered through his mind. And this ring, this strange, ancient thing, had something to do with that place? He swallowed hard. Why the Barrow Downs? Old Took's expression darkened. Because that is where it was taken from. Pippin stared at him. His mouth had gone dry, but he forced himself to speak. You mean someone stole it? The ghostly woman did not answer. She merely watched him, her eyes distant and knowing. Pippin ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. This just keeps getting better and better, he muttered. A tense silence stretched between them. The weight of the past pressed against him, unseen but undeniable. Then, softly, Old Took spoke again. You do not have to do this, Peregrine. Pippin looked up. The old ghost was watching him with an expression that was strangely gentle, almost as if he regretted involving him in this at all. You have carried enough burdens, Old Took continued. Seen enough shadows. This is not your duty. Pippin let out a breathless laugh. And yet, here I am. Old Took's expression did not change. Yes, he murmured. Here you are. Pippin sighed, glancing down at the ring once more. He could feel the weight of it, more than just metal and time. It was history, regret, and unfulfilled promise lingering in the air like an unfinished song. And now, it was his. He closed his fingers around the ring and slipped it into his pocket. Right then, he said, squaring his shoulders. Looks like I'm going to the Barrow Downs. A cold wind stirred through the chamber, though there were no windows, no doors open to the outside air. The candle in Pippin's hand flickered violently, its flame shrinking before regaining its strength. The ghostly woman's expression softened. "Thank you," she murmured. Pippin gave a lopsided smile, though there was little humor in it. "Don't thank me yet." Old Took watched him for a long moment. Then, with a slow nod, he stepped back. The chamber suddenly felt lighter, as if some of the weight that had lingered here for so long had begun to ease. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the ghosts were gone. The candlelight steadied. The air grew still. Pippin stood in the quiet, his heart pounding. He glanced down at the ring, still hidden in his pocket. And then, without another word, he turned and made his way back toward the entrance, stepping out of the past and into whatever came next. The halls of Great Smiles were quiet as Pippin emerged from the hidden chamber. The candle in his hand burned steadily now, casting long flickering shadows against the wooden beams and stone walls. He glanced over his shoulder once, half expecting to see Old Took's ghost still standing there, but the chamber was empty. Silent. As if nothing had ever happened. But something had happened. Pippin could feel the weight of it in his pocket, the silver ring pressing against his leg like a stone. No, this wasn't just a trinket or some old family heirloom. This was something else. Something forgotten and buried, and now it was his burden to carry. A shiver ran through him as he made his way through the tunnels, his mind racing ahead to what lay before him. The Barrow Downs. Even the name sent a cold tremor down his spine. He still remembered the last time he had been there, trapped with Mary, Frodo, and Sam inside one of those ancient tombs. The White's whispering voice had slithered through his thoughts, filling him with a dread unlike anything he had ever known. He could still recall the weight of the Barrow White's cold grip, the chill of the long-dead blade resting against his throat. If it hadn't been for Tom Bombadil. Pippin shook his head. He couldn't think about that now. Reaching the main hallway, he slowed his steps, pausing to listen. It was late. Most of the household had long since gone to bed. That was good. He didn't particularly want to explain to anyone why he was creeping around at this hour. Still, there was one person who might be awake. He made his way toward the west wing, where the private rooms of the Took family were located. Sure enough, a faint glow spilled from beneath a half-open door. He knocked lightly before pushing it open. Mary looked up from the armchair by the fireplace, his brows raising. "Well now, this is a surprise. And here I thought you'd gone to bed hours ago." Pippin hesitated in the doorway before stepping inside, shutting the door behind him. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, golden light across the room. Mary was nursing a mug of something, tea, most likely, though his sharp eyes told Pippin that he wasn't quite as relaxed as he seemed. Mary studied him for a long moment. "You've got that look," he said finally. "What look?" Pippin asked. "The one that usually means trouble is about to follow." Pippin let out a breathless chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. "I suppose you could say that." Mary frowned slightly, setting his mug aside. "All right then. Out with it." Pippin hesitated. He didn't quite know how to explain everything. How did one even begin to describe waking a long-dead ancestor, uncovering a forgotten promise, and being tasked with returning a ring to one of the most cursed places in Middle-earth? Instead, he simply reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver band. Mary's eyes narrowed. "That doesn't look like your usual bit of mischief." "It isn't," Pippin admitted. Mary leaned forward, studying the ring more closely. Where did you find it? Pippin exhaled sharply, sinking into the chair opposite his cousin. In a hidden chamber, beneath great smiles. Mary blinked. A hidden chamber? Pippin nodded. And inside it, well, I may have met a ghost or two. Mary stared at him. You're serious? Completely. Mary leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. All right. Tell me everything. And so Pippin did. He recounted the discovery of the passage, the strange feeling that had led him to explore it in the first place. He described Old Took's ghost and the mysterious woman, the whispers in the dark, the carvings on the wall. And, most of all, the ring. By the time he finished, Mary had gone very quiet. Pippin watched him carefully. Say something. Mary ran a hand through his hair. You're planning to take it back to the Barrow Downs, aren't you? Pippin nodded. I have to. Mary exhaled slowly. Pip, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Are you sure about this? No, Pippin admitted. But if I don't do it, no one will. Mary was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping lightly against the arm of his chair. Then, finally, he sighed. Well then, he said, standing up. I suppose I'd better pack. Pippin blinked. Wait. What? Mary gave him a look. You didn't actually think I was going to let you go alone, did you? Pippin opened his mouth, then closed it again. He should have known better. Mary smirked at his expression. You might be a fool, Pippin, but you're my fool. And I'd rather not have to explain to your parents why you wandered off and got yourself into trouble with a Barrow-wight. Pippin grinned, his chest feeling just a little lighter. You do realize this means sneaking out great smiles before dawn? Mary waved a hand. Please. I've been sneaking out of places since before you could walk. Pippin laughed, shaking his head. All right then. Let's go find ourselves a wight. Mary rolled his eyes. Let's try to avoid that part, shall we? Pippin tucked the ring back into his pocket, standing up. He still felt the weight of it, the unease curling in the pit of his stomach. But with Mary by his side, it somehow felt a little less daunting. They would leave before sunrise, and the road to the Barrow Downs would begin. The first light of dawn had not yet touched the hills when Pippin and Mary slipped out of great smiles. The air was crisp with the lingering chill of the night, and a soft mist curled around the grassy slopes, shrouding the land in a ghostly silver veil. Pippin pulled his cloak tighter around himself, feeling the weight of the ring in his pocket like an anchor. It had been a long time since he had snuck out of the smiles like this. Usually, such escapades were for late-night mischief, not dangerous quests to return ancient artifacts to cursed burial grounds. Mary walked beside him, his own cloak pulled up against the morning chill. His expression was serious but determined. If he had any doubts about their course, he didn't show them. Are we taking ponies? Mary asked, keeping his voice low as they passed the last of the outbuildings. Pippin shook his head. Too noisy. And I don't fancy explaining to the stable hands why we're riding off before breakfast. Mary sighed. Right. Walking it is, then. The two hobbits made their way across the fields, following the gentle slopes eastward. Their goal was to reach the Great East Road before midday and from there make for Bree. It was a long road to the Barrow Downs, but at least it was a familiar one. For a while, they walked in silence, their boots whispering against the damp grass. The Shire was still asleep around them, no lanterns glowed in the distant farmhouses, no early morning chatter drifted through the air. Just the quiet hum of the wind and the soft rustling of the leaves. Pippin glanced at Mary. "You're awfully quiet." Mary gave a small shrug. "Just thinking." "That's dangerous," Pippin teased, though his heart wasn't quite in it. Mary didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at Pippin with something almost like concern. "I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing." Pippin frowned. "I thought you agreed we had to do this." "I did," Mary said. "And I still do. But I also know the Barrow Downs aren't exactly the friendliest place in Middle-earth. There's a reason folks avoid them." Pippin sighed, kicking a loose stone as they walked. "I know. Believe me, I haven't forgotten." How could he? The memory of the last time they had been trapped in the cold, deathly silence of those ancient tombs was burned into his mind. The whispering voices, the unseen hands dragging them down into the darkness. He shuddered. Mary noticed. "Maybe we should stop and breathe first. Get some supplies. A bit of extra food. Maybe some ponies once we're farther from home." Pippin hesitated, then nodded. "That's not a bad idea." It wasn't just the supplies he wanted. Bree meant people. Noise. Warmth. A brief moment of normalcy before they ventured into the unknown. They walked on, the mist swirling around their feet as the land stretched out before them. By mid-morning, they reached the Great East Road. The well-trodden path stretched far in both directions, winding through the gentle hills toward Bree. The rising sun burned away some of the lingering mist, but Pippin still felt an unease he couldn't quite shake. They walked at a steady pace, passing the occasional cart or traveler. Most were bound for Hobbiton or heading east toward the lands beyond. A few nodded in greeting, though none paid the two hobbits much mind. That suited Pippin just fine. Around midday, they stopped beneath the shade of an old oak tree to rest. Pippin pulled out a bit of bread and cheese from his pack, tearing off a piece and chewing thoughtfully. Mary sat beside him, staring off toward the horizon. "Do you think we should tell Frodo?" Mary asked suddenly. Pippin paused mid-bite. It was a fair question. Frodo had more experience with things like this than either of them. He had carried the One Ring, after all, and walked through more dangers than Pippin could count. If anyone would know what to do about an ancient ring tied to the Barrow Downs, it was him. But Frodo was far away, living a quiet life in Rivendell. And Pippin wasn't sure he wanted to disturb that. He swallowed, shaking his head. "No. Not yet, at least." Mary studied him. "You're sure?" Pippin nodded, though he wasn't. "I think we need to see this through first." Mary sighed but didn't argue. They finished their meal in silence, then continued on their way. By evening, the gates of Bree loomed ahead. The town was as lively as ever, merchants calling out their wares, travelers moving in and out of the gate, the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread wafting through the air. As they stepped through the entrance, Pippin felt a small wave of relief. Bree was safe. familiar. They made their way through the bustling streets toward the prancing pony. The old inn stood just as they remembered it, warm light spilling from the windows, the sign creaking gently in the breeze. Mary pushed open the door, and they stepped inside. The common room was crowded, filled with men, dwarves, and the occasional hobbit. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of ale and pipe smoke filled the air. Barlime and Butterbird, the innkeeper, looked up from behind the counter. His eyes widened in recognition. Well, if it isn't Mr. Brandybuck and Mr. Took. Been some time since we've seen you round these parts. Pippin grinned. Aye, it has. Thought we'd stop in for a bit of food and rest before heading on. Butterbird nodded, already reaching for 2 mugs. I'll have Nob fix you up a room. Mary and Pippin took a seat near the fire, settling into the warmth and noise of the common room. It felt good, sitting here among ordinary folk, as if the weight of their journey had lifted for just a moment. But even as he laughed at one of Mary's jokes and sipped at his ale, Pippin couldn't shake the cold sensation lingering in his chest. The ring in his pocket felt heavier than ever, and though he was warmed by the fire, he could still feel the creeping chill of the Barrow Downs waiting for him in the distance. The night in Bree passed without incident, but Pippin slept fitfully. Even in the comfort of the prancing pony, with a full belly and a fire in the hearth, a restless unease coiled around his mind. He dreamed of cold hands grasping at his cloak, of hollow voices whispering his name through the darkness. And always, there was the weight of the ring, pressing against him like a stone. When he finally woke, the first light of morning was filtering through the wooden shutters. Mary was already up, stuffing the last of his belongings into his pack. About time, Mary said without looking up. Thought I was going to have to drag you out of bed. Pippin groaned, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Didn't sleep well. Mary glanced at him, his expression knowing. Dreams? Pippin hesitated, then nodded. Mary sighed. I was afraid of that. Pippin sat up, stretching. Well, no use lingering. The sooner we get moving, the sooner we get this over with. Mary didn't argue. After a quick breakfast, they set out once more, leaving the warmth and security of Bree behind. Underscore 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 underscore. The road south toward the Barrow Downs was eerily quiet. The rolling green hills of the Shire and Breeland gave way to taller, lonelier slopes, covered in a creeping fog that never seemed to fully lift. The trees here were sparser, twisted and gnarled as if they had been shaped by ancient winds. Pippin pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders. Even with the morning sun shining above, the air felt colder here. Mary walked beside him, his expression unreadable. For a while, neither of them spoke. There was something about this land that made talking feel wrong, as if their voices might wake something best left sleeping. They reached the edge of the downs by late afternoon. The land had changed now, no more farms, no more villages, just great grassy mounds rising from the earth like the backs of sleeping beasts. The wind had a strange sound here, almost like a low whisper weaving through the hills. Pippin swallowed. They had been here before. Years ago, They had wandered too far into the Barrow Downs and nearly paid the price. He still remembered the icy grip of the white, the weight of the ancient blade against his throat. The darkness, the cold. He shook himself. That had been a long time ago. They had survived then. They would survive now. Wouldn't they? Mary stopped at the crest of a hill, glancing at Pippin. "Are you sure about this?" Pippin exhaled. "No, but we've come this far." Mary studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right then, let's finish this." They pressed forward, moving deeper into the Barrow Downs. The further they walked, the thicker the mist became. It clung to their cloaks and swirled around their feet, obscuring the path ahead. Shadows twisted and stretched along the slopes, and the whispering wind grew louder. Pippin reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the ring. It felt colder than before. He wasn't sure if that was just his imagination or something else. "We need to find the right barrow," he said, glancing around. "The one where this came from." Mary frowned. "How exactly do we do that?" Pippin hesitated. That was a very good question. He hadn't thought about it until now, but the Barrow Downs were full of tombs. Some were ancient kings, others long-dead warriors. How were they supposed to know which one had once held this ring? He turned the ring over in his palm, staring at the delicate engravings. Maybe. And then, quite suddenly, the whispering changed. It was no longer just the wind. Mary stiffened beside him. "Did you hear that?" Pippin swallowed hard. "I did." It was a voice, distant and hollow. Not quite words, but something close. A beckoning. The mist swirled, parting just enough to reveal a dark opening in the side of one of the mounds ahead. A barrow. Pippin's breath caught in his throat. It was as if the Downs themselves had heard their question and answered. Mary's hand went to the hilt of his short sword. "I don't like this." "Neither do I," Pippin admitted. They stood at the edge of the barrow's entrance, staring into the dark tunnel leading below. The air that seeped from within was cold, too cold. Pippin took a deep breath. "Well, no sense standing around." Mary grabbed his arm. "Pip." But Pippin had already stepped forward into the shadows. The darkness swallowed him whole. Inside, the air was damp and heavy. The tunnel sloped downward, the walls lined with old stones covered in strange markings. Pippin's breath came faster, but he forced himself to keep moving. He reached into his pack, pulling out a small lantern. The dim glow barely pushed back the darkness, but it was enough to see by. Mary followed close behind, his footsteps echoing in the tight space. "This is a bad idea," he muttered. Pippin didn't argue. The passage opened into a larger chamber, lined with crumbling stone pillars. In the center stood a great stone slab, an ancient tomb. Pippin felt a chill run through him. He stepped forward, heart hammering. His fingers trembled as he pulled the ring from his pocket. The whispering grew louder. Mary sucked in a breath. "Pip, we need to." The lantern flickered. The shadows shifted. And then, a voice. Deep. Hollow. Ancient. "You have returned." Pippin's blood ran cold. The darkness moved. Something was waking. The chamber trembled as the voice echoed through the darkness, sending a shiver down Pippin's spine. The whispering wind had become something else, something alive, something ancient. Merry was at his side in an instant, drawing his short sword. The flickering lantern light did little to dispel the gloom, and shadows twisted unnaturally around them. Pippin's grip tightened around the ring. The air was cold, colder than any winter night in the Shire. It wasn't just the chill of stone and earth, it was something deeper, something that gnawed at his bones and made his breath come in ragged gasps. A shape began to form in the darkness. A figure, tall for a hobbit, though still smaller than a man, materialized at the far end of the chamber. He was draped in an old cloak, tattered and worn, his features obscured by a dim, bluish glow. His eyes, however, burned with something sharp and knowing. Pippin swallowed hard. Gerontius Took. The old Took. His ancestor. The greatest hobbit adventurer the Shire had ever known. The ghost hovered near the ancient stone slab, watching them with something between sadness and expectation. Merry exhaled sharply. "Pip, do something." Pippin hesitated, then stepped forward. He held up the ring in his trembling fingers. I think this belongs to you." The ghost's expression did not change. His voice, when it came, was distant and hollow, like an echo from a long-forgotten time. "You have carried what should have never left this place." Pippin's fingers curled around the ring, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "I didn't mean to take it. I didn't know what it was." Gerontius Took drifted closer, his form barely disturbing the dust in the air. "It is not the taking that matters. It is the returning." The ghost's gaze flickered to the stone slab behind him. For the first time, Pippin noticed the markings, ancient carvings, half-faded, encircling the tomb like a forgotten warning. He couldn't read them, but somehow he understood. This was not just a burial place. It was a seal. A barrier. Pippin's grip tightened. The ring wasn't just an heirloom. It was part of whatever had been buried here, part of whatever had been locked away long ago. And he had taken it. Pippin licked his lips. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have disturbed it." Gerontius Took's eyes softened. "It was not your fault. But it is your burden now to put it right." Pippin nodded, stepping toward the stone slab. The chill in the air deepened as he raised the ring above the tomb. The moment his fingers let go, the chamber groaned. The mist swirled violently, drawn toward the ring as it dropped onto the slab with a soft clink. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a deep rumble shook the earth beneath their feet. The carvings on the tomb flared to life, glowing faintly with pale, eerie light. The shadows that had danced along the walls recoiled, pulling away as if a great weight had been lifted. Pippin staggered back. The air grew warmer. The unnatural cold that had gripped the chamber faded, replaced by the familiar scent of damp stone and old dust. The presence that had loomed over them, something vast and watching, was gone. Gerontius Took let out a slow, weary sigh. "It is done." Pippin's legs felt weak. He barely managed to keep himself standing. Merry lowered his sword, glancing around as if expecting the darkness to return at any moment. "Is that it?" The ghost of the old Took turned to them, his glowing form already beginning to fade. Almost. Pippin swallowed. What do you mean? Gerontius studied him for a long moment, something unreadable in his gaze. Then, softly, he said, "Listen well, Peregrine Took." Pippin straightened. There are things in this world that even the wise do not know. Paths that have been walked and forgotten. Shadows that do not sleep. Pippin shuddered. Gerontius Took's form flickered. The Shire has been protected, but its peace is fragile. You have seen the world beyond its borders. Do not forget what you have learned. Pippin nodded, throat tight. The ghost's expression softened. You remind me of myself in my youth. Curious. Restless. He let out something that might have been a chuckle. But even the most adventurous heart must remember where home is. Pippin felt his chest tighten. The light surrounding Gerontius grew fainter, his form barely holding together. He looked at the two of them one last time. You have done well. Now, go home. And with that, the old Took was gone. The chamber was silent once more. Pippin let out a slow breath. His hands were still shaking. Mary clapped him on the shoulder. Well, that was terrifying. Pippin let out a weak laugh. They stood there for a long moment, just breathing, taking in the stillness of the tomb. The weight of the ring was gone. The presence was gone. It was over. Mary exhaled, shaking his head. Let's get out of here. Pippin didn't argue. Together, they turned and made their way back up the passage. The lantern's glow flickered against the ancient stones, but this time, the darkness did not follow. They emerged from the barrow just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft hues of gold and crimson. The mist had cleared. The whispering wind had died. Pippin took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air. Mary stretched, rubbing his arms. I don't know about you, but I could use a strong drink. Pippin let out a breathless chuckle. Several, I think. They didn't look back as they left the Barrow Downs behind, making their way toward the safety of the road. The ring was gone. The past was at rest. And for the first time since this all began, Pippin felt truly free. The Shire was waiting for them. And this time, he was ready to go home. Tonight, let yourself drift into a tale both calming and mysterious, a journey into the heart of great smiles, where ancient secrets lie waiting to be uncovered. Beneath the soft glow of candlelight, within earthen walls that have stood for centuries, an unwitting adventurer stirs something long forgotten. Listen closely, and let the voice of this story guide you through dim corridors, into the depths of silence, where the wind murmurs and the past has not yet faded away. Take a slow breath. Close your eyes if you wish. The story begins now.